Hi, this is a PowerPoint video about bonds. Let me get this set up. Okay, so just give me 1 second here. Okay, first, what are bonds? Well, we have covalent bonds and ionic bond. No, just kidding. Not those kinds of bonds. That's in science and chemistry and that kind of thing. No, sorry, bad joke. What is a financial bond? It's an IOU, sometimes written this way, IOU contract. For example, Mr. Shotland says, "Oh, geez, I forgot my money for lunch today." Let's say it's Tuesday. "Can you please lend me $5?" And you, the student, say, "Sure, Mr. Unreliable. Will you pay me back $5 plus $1 interest on Friday? Okay?" Mr. Shotland says, "Yes, we have a deal." And you, the student, say, "Whoa, Mr. Unreliable, first we need to make a contract that says you're borrowing $5 and you'll pay me back $6. That contract is called a bond because the borrower, Mr. Shotland, is bounded or bound, obligated, required to pay back the lender. And a simplified version would look like this, okay? Here's our bond. I, Mr. Shotland, borrowed $5 on Tuesday and will pay back Chris, the student, $5 plus $1 interest on Friday. Here's a real example. It's a U.S. federal government bond. If you buy this bond, you lend the United States federal government $1,000. You can see it here in the corners of the bond certificate. You're lending $1,000 and you're doing it for 30 years, from 1977 to 2007. That's 30 years. How can you tell? It's a little hard, but if you look here, it says dated February 15th, 1977, and it comes due, or the federal government's got to pay back February 15th, 2007. So this is a 30-year bond. The U.S. government will pay you back $1,000 that you loaned to it, plus 7.58% interest. And 7.58% interest of $1,000 is $75.80. And you can see that interest right here. Again, with a bond, you are the lender, and in this case, it's the government that is borrowing from you. There's some key vocabulary you need to understand. Par value is the face value of the bond. It's the principal. The principal is the amount of money that was loaned. In the example I just showed you, that was a $1,000 bond, so you're lending $1,000. That's the par value, that's the principal, that's the amount you're lending. Interest rate is how much you'll be paid back in addition to the principal. It's also known as the coupon rate because years ago you exchanged paper coupons in order to get the interest. In the example I just showed you, it was 7.58% interest, and on $1,000, that's $75.80. The issue or float date is when the bond was sold or issued or floated or bought. All those things mean the same. That's when the money was loaned. In the example I just showed you, it was February 15th, 1977. That's when the bond started. The maturity date is when you'll be paid back the principal. In the example I just showed you, it was February 15th, 2007. Denomination, that's the amount of the bond. Examples, we have $50 bonds, $100 bonds, $1,000 bonds, $5,000 bonds, $10,000 bonds, 100,000 bonds, etc., etc. Bonds are also known as fixed income. Why? Because the lender will be paid back a fixed amount. You're going to get the principal back, that's the amount you loaned, plus the interest. In this bond, who is borrowing money? I'll give you a second to check out this bond certificate, and you can see right here. Here, the borrower is the Commonwealth of Australia. In other words, the government of Australia is borrowing money. What is the par or face value? What's the principal? What's the amount that they're borrowing? If you look here, you'll see it's $20. What is the interest or coupon rate? If you look right here, you'll see it's 5.25%. What is the issue date? Here, 14th day of February, that's Valentine's Day, 1966. And when is the maturity date? If you look right here, you can see the maturity date is 1987. So how long is this bond? What is the term of this bond? This is a 21-year bond. In other words, if you buy this bond, you're lending $20 to the government of Australia for 21 years. And at the end, they're going to pay you back that $20, and you're also going to get 5% interest. What is the denomination? This is a $20 bond. And again, in the old days, you had these coupons at the bottom that you actually would cut off and turn in to get your interest payments. These days, we don't do that. These days, everything's electronic. How do bonds work? Again, you, the lender, purchase a bond, which means you're loaning money to the issuer. That's the borrower. The issuer or borrower uses your money and pays you interest payments. They promise to pay you a set amount of interest for a defined period of time. The principal is returned at the end. When maturity is reached, the issuer returns your original investment, assuming no default. In other words, assuming that they don't go bankrupt and they can pay you back. So you're going to get a little bit of interest each year, and then at the end, you get the principal back. Here's another look at it. Here's you, the lender, or me, could be an individual. It could be a company. A company could buy a government bond, or another government could buy a government bond. And so they purchase the bond from the borrower. The borrower is usually government. It could also be a company. A company can borrow money. And the borrower is going to make interest payments annually to the lender. Okay, and at the end of the term, at the end of the bond's life, the borrower is going to return the principal to the lender. Why use bonds? Well, let's say a town government wants to raise money for a school. Here you see the Okarche School. I think I found this. I think this is in Kansas. Should the town government raise money by raising taxes? No. Are higher taxes popular? Yes or no? No. So what's an alternative funding source? Instead of raising taxes, a town or city or state or national government could raise money by selling bonds. And here you see the Okarche School bond from 2016. I guess this town was trying to raise money to put on an addition for a new gym and performing arts theater. Let's say a city government wants to enlarge its airport. How could it raise money? Well, it could raise taxes. Is that going to be popular with the people? No. So another way to do it, another way to raise money is to sell bonds. And here's a headline from a newspaper article in 2017. Orlando to vote on a $975 million in Orlando International Airport bonds and debt to build a new terminal. Why do you think Orlando, Florida wants to build a new airport terminal? And I'll give you a hint. You can look at this picture. Of course, Orlando is where tourists come for Disney World, and a lot of conventions and conferences are there because the weather's nice down in Florida. So it really matters to the city to have a brand new, clean, good airport. But they don't want to fix it up by raising taxes. Instead, they're going to borrow $975 million through bonds and fund it that way. Do Americans like it when the U.S. federal government raises taxes? Yes or no? No. So what's the alternative? Sell bonds. So here's a headline. It says U.S. Treasury, that's the federal government, is to sell $90 billion in debt. And this usually happens on Mondays. There's an auction, that is, they sell it off. And these are very short-term bonds, in this case, 13-week bonds and 26-week bonds. You see they're doing this in March. Here's the article. The U.S. Treasury Department will sell off $90 billion in securities. That's a financial instrument you can buy and sell. And here are the details. On Monday, the government's going to sell or borrow $48 billion in 13-week bills. So those are going to mature. They'll come due in July. And the CUSIP number is just the identification number of the bonds. Also, the government is going to sell $42 billion worth of 26-week bills. In other words, it's going to borrow $42 billion through these very short-term bonds. They start in April, they mature in October, and again, there's the CUSIP number, the identification number for those bonds. The Treasury Department that does this is right next door to the White House. So this is down in Washington, D.C. This is a bird's eye aerial view from above. Here's the White House, okay, and here's the Treasury Department right next door. All right, there are different types of bonds. This is a U.S. federal government bond. I showed you this before. Who's borrowing the money? The U.S. federal government. Who is lending the money? It could be an individual. It could be a company that has some cash sitting around. It could be a state government. It could be a Mexican business person. It could be the government of Germany wants to park some money in the United States government. Anybody can buy a bond. Federal government bonds have different maturities. In other words, they last different lengths of time. T-bills have a maturity of up to 1 year. You can have a 3-month T-bill that's going to pay you back in 3 months, a 6-month T-bill, or a 12-month T-bill. Those are very short. T-notes, and the T stands for Treasury, Treasury notes have a maturity from 1 to 10 years. T-bonds, also known as Treasuries, have a maturity of more than 10 years. Most investors consider the U.S. federal government bonds to be the safest investment in the world. Why? Because the U.S. federal government is going to be there tomorrow, next Thursday, next July, next year. Probably Nike will, but we can't be sure. Probably Apple will, but we can't be sure. Sometimes companies go bankrupt and that kind of thing. So when the stock market or the economy crashes, where do investors put some of their money? They've got this cash or they want to move money to a safe place. They buy U.S. federal government bonds, T-bills, T-notes, or T-bonds. You can also have a state government bond. Who is borrowing money here? Well, I'll give you a second to look at this bond certificate and you'll see it's the state of New York. Who is lending money? Again, whoever buys this bond. It could be an individual. It could be a company. It could be an English business person. What is the par or face value? Well, if you look down here, it says $1,000. All right. Issue date right here, 1931. That's the bottom of the Great Depression, when the Great Depression was horrible. And here's the maturity date, 1954. So what is the term or maturity or length of this bond? In other words, how long does it last? This bond lasts 23 years. And let's see, what is it for? It's for general state improvements. That usually means schools or roads, hospitals or bridges, that kind of thing. The state of New York is borrowing money instead of raising taxes. A city government bond is also known as a municipal bond. Who is borrowing? Well, let's look down here. It's the city of Hartford, Connecticut. How much are they borrowing? Well, if you look here, you can see they're going to borrow $1,000. And for what reason? If you look right here, it says high school bonds. So they're probably fixing up or building new high schools. Many investors like what are called muni bonds because the profit you make for them is tax-free. You don't have to pay capital gains tax on that profit. Why did our government set it up like that? The government makes muni bonds tax-free to incentivize investors to do what? Buy muni bonds. In other words, lend money to city governments so that city governments don't have to raise taxes. Companies can sell bonds too. They are known as corporate bonds. So let's identify here. What is the corporation? Ah, it's McDonald's. What is the par or face value? In other words, how much are they borrowing with this bond? And if you look right here, you can see it's $1,000. What is the interest or coupon rate? A little hard to see, but if you look right here, you can see 4.25%. What is the maturity date? It says right here, 1993. There are different types of corporate bonds. Investment grade bonds are issued by big, established, stable companies such as Nike, Disney, Apple, etc. Do they have to pay a high interest rate to attract bond buyers? No, they don't. On the other hand, you have high yield bonds, also known as junk bonds. They are issued, that should be issued, that's a typo, by new, young, or risky companies. Example, Shady Sam Services. Do they have to pay a high interest rate to attract bond buyers? Yes, they do, because they might go bankrupt. So why do some investors like buying high yield bonds or junk bonds? Because they pay a high interest rate. But what's the risk? The risk is Shady Sam's company might go bankrupt and then they can't pay you back. There are three companies that grade or rate bonds according to how likely they are to pay back. The three rating companies are Fitch, Moody's, and a third company called Standard & Poor's. It's just the last name of the founders, kind of a funny name. Investment grade bonds won't pay a lot of interest. Again, those are big, stable companies. But you're going to get your money back plus interest. You're basically guaranteed at least some profit. So investors are happy to buy bonds from Apple or Microsoft, whatever. They get these high grades, AAA, AA, that kind of thing. If you get below here, now you're talking about high yield or junk bonds, rated B or C or even D. What do those companies do to incentivize you to lend them money? They pay you a lot of interest, but you might not get your money back. Should I invest in bonds? Well, let's do a cost-benefit analysis. What are the benefits? Why should I invest in bonds? Your bank savings account is only going to pay you 0.1% interest a year. And a 1-year certificate of deposit or CD will only pay you 0.5% interest. That is not a lot. A money market pays you about 1% interest per year. And inflation eats away at money by 1 to 2% each year. Remember, inflation is rising prices. As prices go up, the purchasing power of your money goes down. So you really need to make sure that your money is growing faster than inflation. Job salaries increase at about 2.5% a year, just beating inflation. College tuition increases at 4% a year. Health insurance premiums increase at 5% a year. So you need to invest more aggressively than simply putting your money in the bank. You need to invest in bonds. They grow on average about 4% per year. Again, you want your money to grow faster than inflation erodes its value. So if you look here, you can see the green is inflation, and inflation's gone up over time, and the inflation about 3% a year going back to 1900. Bonds have been growing about 5% a year going back to 1900, and you see the yellow bond line beating the inflation line. All right. Investing in bonds. How do I make money from bonds? You can simply buy a bond and hold it until it matures. What will you get back? You'll get back the principal at the maturity date, and you'll get back a little bit of interest each year. Or you can buy a bond at a low price and sell it for a higher price. Buying and selling is also known as trading. Here's an example. You buy a $100 1-year Netflix bond that pays 4% interest. You plan on making how much profit? Well, 4% of 100 is $4. During the year, interest rates on other investments go down to, say, 3%. Now, your bond paying you 4% looks better or worse compared to other investments. It looks better. You could sell your bond at a higher price, a premium, say $110, and make a $10 profit. That's better than the 4% profit you were going to get simply by buying and holding the bond. Why would other investors be willing to pay you a premium, pay you $110 for this $100 bond? Because it's paying 4%, whereas other investments only pay 3%. On the other hand, let's say that during the year, interest rates on other investments go up to, say, 5%. Now your bond paying you 4% looks better or worse compared to other investments? It looks worse. You should sell your bond at a lower price. We call that a discount, say $90. You'll lose money. You got $90 from the sale, but you spent $100 on the purchase. You lost $10, but now you have $90 cash to invest and get that higher 5% interest. So with bonds, when interest rates go up elsewhere in the marketplace and other investments, it means other investments pay better. Bond prices fall because people want to unload their bonds and get their cash out. When interest rates go down elsewhere, now your bond is paying better, so you're going to raise your bond price and sell it at a profit. Here's a little graphic that shows you other interest rates are going up. You think, oh, shoot, the bond I have doesn't pay as well as other investments. I better lower the price, sell it, get my money out so I can reinvest it and get those higher interest rates. On the other hand, if interest rates fall elsewhere in the market and other bonds, other investments, you think, sweet, my bond, the bond I have, pays more than other investments. I can raise the price, sell it, and make a profit. Yes. All right, those are the benefits. What are the costs or problems with bonds? A big problem is inflation. If there is high inflation, that is, prices are rising and life is becoming more expensive, then the money that your bond will pay you back in the future won't be worth as much as it is now. So during high inflation, do investors prefer stocks or bonds? Stocks, because the bonds are going to pay you back in a year or 3 or 5 or 10 years. And when they pay you back, your money won't be worth as much. Rising interest rates are another problem. If interest rates are rising fast elsewhere, you don't want your money stuck in a bond that pays less. So during rising interest rates, do investors prefer long-term bonds or short-term? They prefer short-term bonds because they'll expire soon. They can get their money out and invest it at the new rising interest rates. Another problem with corporate bonds is that the company could go bankrupt and default. In other words, they might not be able to pay you back. So do most investors prefer investment-grade bonds or junk bonds? They prefer investment-grade bonds in those big, stable companies. Another problem with bonds is they usually don't grow as much or as fast as stocks. Let's talk about bonds versus stocks. Why don't I just invest in stocks instead? After all, stocks usually grow by 6% a year. That's better than bonds, 4% a year. Yes, but a stock is a piece of ownership. If that company struggles, your stock price could fall and you'd lose money. If the company goes bankrupt, you could lose all your money in stocks. But a bond is a contract. You are basically guaranteed to get your money back plus interest. You are basically guaranteed at least some profit. Bonds are considered safer than stocks. All right. Why do individual investors like you and me and institutional investors like university endowments, like Boston College has got a lot of money, or Harvard's got a lot of money, or UMass has got, or Northeastern's got a lot of money. And pension funds, those are retirement funds, and insurance companies, what do they do with all their cash? They invest it in bonds. Why? Well, let's look at this graph. It goes all the way back to 1926. You see the stock market crash of 1929. Here you see inflation rising over the decades and eating away at our money. Here you see the growth of bonds, and here you see the growth of stocks. Bonds are the second best investment after stocks. What's the point of this graph? This goes all the way back to 1800. It's about 200 years back to when Thomas Jefferson was president. And what's the best investment? Stocks. $1 back in 1800, if you'd invested it in the stock market, would be $800,000 today. Bonds are the second best investment. Here are your T-bills, your short, safe federal government bonds. All right. There's gold. You would have doubled your money. Okay. And if you had just put your money, if you just put your cash in the sock drawer, what would happen? That $1 would have declined in value. It would have depreciated down to 6 cents. Why? Because of inflation. Inflation eats away at the value of our money. So again, don't put your cash in a stock drawer. You got to invest it in stocks and bonds. How can I have my money grow faster than inflation and also basically be guaranteed at least some profit? Again, invest in bonds. If you had $10, and you put it in bonds back in 1800, it'd be worth about $8,000 today. Okay, stocks would be worth $5 million. We'll talk about stocks soon. Do bonds beat inflation? Here, inflation is measured by the official statistics, CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Here's CPI, all right, growing. Gold just barely beats it, okay? And you see here bonds beat inflation and stocks definitely do. Again, this is going back over the last 200 years, basically since the birth of the country. Even if you won't live for centuries, bonds are still a good investment. Let's look at the growth of $1 invested in stocks and bonds from 1965 to 2014. It's about 70 years. Here you see that $1 invested would have grown to $112, about 10% growth rate per year. And if you put $1 in bonds, it would grow about 7% a year up to about $24. So look at the magic and power of saving and investing. $1 became how much? $112 in stocks, $24 in bonds. So for every dollar that you spend on drugs, you're missing out on the opportunity to have that money grow and grow and grow. Drugs cost you money up front, and they cost you your health and even more money in the future. All right, how should I invest in bonds? Remember, you start by putting 6 to 9 to 12 months worth of emergency cash into a bank savings account, ideally a money market or a certificate of deposit account. It's not going to grow that much, maybe 1% a year, but it's safe, safe, safe. Then, with your long-term savings, you practice what we call the rule of 100. The rule of 100 says you take 100 and you subtract your age. That's the percent of your long-term savings that should be in stocks. Your age is the percent of long-term savings that should be in bonds. For example, if you're 20, subtract 20 from 100, 80% of your money should be in stocks, that's equity, and 20% of your money should be in fixed income, that's bonds. If you're 30, again, 100 minus your age, minus 30, 70% of your money in equity or stocks, and then your age, or 30%, should be in fixed income or bonds. If you look here throughout a person's financial life, you'll see what happens. The percent of their money that should be in stocks goes up or down. It goes down. And the percent of their money that should be in bonds goes up or down. It goes up. Why? Because bonds are safer. And when you're 75, you don't have a lot of time to ride out the ups and downs of the stock market. When you're 20, 25, 30, you have a long time to ride that roller coaster heading upwards. So as you age, you shift your money from stocks to bonds. But when you're young, you want your money mostly in stocks. How should I invest in bonds? Do not buy one individual bond. Why not? Because that government or that company might go bankrupt and default. In other words, they might not pay back. And new bonds might appear that pay higher interest rates. So you want to spread your money out. You want to diversify. Spread it among several bonds. This is called diversification. Spread your money out. And there's a cheap, fast way to diversify. You invest in a mutual fund. What is a mutual fund? It's a financial company that combines many people's savings and invests that money in many different investments. What are the costs and benefits of a mutual fund? Well, the cost is that you do pay the money manager a fee. You should only invest in mutual funds whose fees or expense ratio is 1% of your money invested or less. 1% or less. You don't want to pay a lot in fees. You don't want to make them rich. You want to make yourself rich. The benefits of mutual funds are that you get diversification. In other words, your money is spread out. One of those investments might go bad, but not all of them. Most are going to go okay. You also get a professional money manager. And the mutual fund gets bulk discounts when it buys bonds, so it's cheaper than you individually buying and selling individual investments. Do not use day trading platforms like E-Trade. They get rich off of you making many transactions. Which mutual fund should I use? There are two companies that millions of investors use. They are trustworthy and charge low fees. And the two companies are Vanguard and Fidelity. This is the Vanguard headquarters. It's located outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here are Vanguard's offices, and the people in the finance industry use special computers called Bloomberg terminals. Here they are, and they give them all the financial information and news they need, and they do it quickly. Fidelity is another excellent company. It's located in Boston Seaport here in downtown Boston. Fidelity was started by Ned Johnson, and now his daughter, Abigail, runs Fidelity. She is the richest person in Massachusetts. She's worth $15 billion. If you go into finance, you'd work in a cubicle called a cube like this when you're 23 or 24, 25, and your job is to get information to and for the decision makers you work under. You're putting together charts, you're doing research, putting together tables and information for the decision makers. Here's a decision maker. This is the office of a mutual fund manager at Fidelity. He decides which bonds the mutual fund should buy and how many of them and at what price and if or when to sell those bonds. What can you do to get here? Because these people make great money and they've got a beautiful big mansion and they got a house on the Cape and all that jazz. The way to succeed is to be one of the first people in the office every day. Dress appropriately, read your emails and news before work so you're on top of everything. Do all your tasks promptly. Ask for help quickly if and when you need it. Keep your eyes and ears open to learn. Keep your mouth shut. Don't offend anyone. Work hard, be nice, and do your job. This is another fund manager in her office. Here's her Bloomberg terminal, and you see here's her, lovely teenager. Okay, that's basically you. I mean, some of your parents probably work in this industry. How do I pick a mutual fund? I've got a chart for that, and I will show you and explain that in a separate video. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.